Hello, welcome to Film Independent Presents. I'm Rachel Bleemer and Director of Events for Film Independent. Before we get started with today's exciting Q&A, I have to give some praise to our sponsors. Thank you to our incredible lead sponsor, the Hollywood Foreign Press Association, and our screening partner, Vision Media. For those of you watching live today, please use the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen to ask our panelists some questions for the end. I'm honored to introduce our guest moderator today. Please welcome Chief Film Critic for Deadline Hollywood, Pete Hammond. Pete, take it from here.
All right, thanks so much, and happy to be here today with this film, which I think you've all seen now in and of itself. And there's so much to talk about here. I want to introduce the two movers and shakers of this movie, to be sure. First off, he is the director of the film. He directed the original stage show, off-Broadway show that ran, I believe, for something like 72 weeks and over 500 performances, 560 performances, and then came to LA where I actually had seen it. And so when I saw the film come up, I go, wait, oh my God, this is that show. But it was a completely different experience. So Frank Oz, you know, has done so many movies, Death at a Funeral and the Score, Bowfinger, In and Out, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, Little Shop of Horrors, Muppets Take Manhattan. I could go on and on and on. Of course, he's also an actor too. You may have heard of a little character called Yoda and many other things he's done. Frank Oz, welcome.
Hi, thank you very much. Just
Yeah.
to let you know, just to correct something, you know, actually Derek directed it with me. It wasn't just me alone.
Co-directed, yes, and Derek, in addition to being a co-director here, the creator of this, the reason we're here today, you know, has done this show, as I mentioned, many times on stage, and is known not as a magician, you know. And Derek, well, this is Derek DelGaudio. Welcome.
Hello.
Welcome. What do you like to call yourself? How do you describe what you do?
I try not to. I just it depends on who I'm talking to, I guess. But I'm not opposed to the word magician. I just think it corrupts some of the work that I do from time to time.
Yeah. Wikipedia describes you as an interdisciplinary artist, which I thought was an interesting
That's
kind
fair.
of all sorts of things. Well, this is an extraordinary show and an even more extraordinary movie. I thought, I would think, just looking at the show, how would they ever turn this into a film? You know, that is going to be a cinematic experience. But boy, you guys certainly succeeded in that. Derek, did you have any idea when you started this, when you were doing the show, when you started shooting it, that this would be something that the people around the world are now experiencing on Hulu and, you know, and any way they can now theatrically?
No, I mean, we just started doing it kind of for ourselves as an experiment to see what we could capture and how the work would translate to film. Like, I don't know that we knew for certain it would become a film until we did it. And it was kind of a leap of faith on our part to start doing it, because neither Frank nor myself actually usually like how stage work is translated to film, and it's so I typically avoid it, and I know Frank doesn't typically like to do that as well. So it was kind of a risk to do it, and we just slowly started going down the path, and eventually we saw that it could work.
Yeah, and it's interesting to get the reactions. I've seen some of the reactions from people that have seen it on film that didn't see the stage, and it's, I think, even more of a visceral kind of reaction that you're getting from people watching is that they call and go, oh my God, there's this thing I just saw. And it's unbelievable. And they talk about it that way. Frank, how many shows did you have to shoot and editing and putting this all together to make it work in this form?
Well, it was actually Derek's idea to record it. I didn't shoot it. I said to Derek, you know, I need a vision. I need a strong vision, like I did with the theater piece, to help. And I didn't have that. And I said, I'm happy to work with editing and everything else. So, and Derek, you didn't call the shots either, right? You kind of gave a form idea to them and they just kind of went on their own, right?
Yeah, it was a capture. I mean, we had talented filmmakers help and come in and shoot and basically start capturing footage. And then it wasn't until we saw the footage that we really understood what it had to be. We I had an idea of what it could be beforehand in terms of a multimedia type of like different using animation and multiple shows and things like that. These are things that early on we knew we were going to do, but it wasn't until we actually saw the footage that we could actually tell the story we needed to tell with it, which is the story that's on stage. But how that story is told was what Frank and I needed to figure out.
Yeah, it was really the real process was during editing, that discovery process. As most know that in a situation like this, one doesn't have a script in the beginning, so one kind of creates that script in editing, and it's a thing where you go down dark alleys, hit brick walls, and turn around and try another alley. But regarding, and Derek can speak better of this, but nevertheless, I'll start. Regarding how amazing it is to see these faces, I would be sitting in the back row at least once a week for, I don't know how long, a year or something like that. And I would be seeing the show, but I would be seeing the backs of everybody, and which was stunning because everybody hopes for shows, for audiences like this, where they don't move a muscle, they don't cough, anything. But I never saw the faces. And Derek realized he saw the faces. Go ahead, Derek, take over, because that's what I didn't see. And I realized, holy cow, this is where the movie is where his faces are.
Yeah, I think that was what led me to think that there was something worth capturing. Is every night I had the luxury of seeing the audience, and so I had a point of view that no one else had, which is everyone else was watching the stage show, and I got to see what was actually happening, which was half of the show was in the audience in terms of watching people's faces and how people were responding to it. And so that we knew that would be an important element, and yeah, that's part of the reason that we pursued it, was because I suspected that would be an important part of it, and it was the other half of the equation.
Well, faces is a big part of identity, and this shows, if it's about anything, it's about identity, I guess, too.
Yeah. So we shot 5 full shows, and then captured many other a few dozen bits and pieces, elements over the course of a year or so.
Oh, so and what you mentioned editing, Frank. I mean, so that's a lot of material to edit together to try to make it cohesive and make it feel like we're watching one show here.
Yeah, we had to go through absolutely every single frame. About 100 hours, Derek?
Yeah.
We had to go through every single frame. We couldn't miss anything, and that took a long time. But that's comes with the territory,
Yeah, it's fascinating. Can you talk about, Derek, your concept for this show initially? Did you have any idea it would provoke this kind of emotional response in audience after audience after audience that you get? And was that your goal to do that?
I did not. Frank did. I was in it, so I couldn't recognize the emotional, how it would emotionally resonate with people, because I was, it was me and my thoughts and my words, and so I didn't. It was Frank who knew that the emotional aspects were what would carry it, because there's not really a linear story to track. There's a hidden narrative, but there's not a not a real story. This happens, then next, and then next. So Frank was the one who recognized that the emotional narrative of the work was really what was going to resonate with people, and took a lot of trust on my part, both our parts, really, but to go down that road, because it wasn't so obvious, but I trust Frank completely, and believed him, and we eventually got there.
How did you see that, Frank? All your years of experience in movies and what moves people and things. And how did you discover that that's a key element of this?
Well, just by instinct. We did the show in Los Angeles, and I think Derek can agree. Even though the show started, we had an opening night, but it didn't mean we were ready, like most shows, right? And so we did the show, but it was a bit too presentational, and there was no guts underneath it. And I worked with Derek, and I felt there was a way to do that. And I knew that there'd be an emotional reaction because it's non-verbal communication what's going on. They're not listening to a story and reacting. What's happening, and they don't even know it, is where the emotions begin is in the places where Derek doesn't talk. And that's where the emotions build. And I knew they would build. I had no idea the reaction would be this large. And that was a shock to both of us.
Was it? Wow, yeah. And that's where I saw the film, at the Geffen, in the small theater there at the Geffen, a tiny kind of theater. But you really felt after this show that the audience was of one, that it was a community of strangers when we walked in, but much closer to them in a human way.
You know,
Uh,
there's something in Derek. I keep saying this, it's unusual, and it's undefinable to me, really. But something in Derek's soul somehow touched other souls some way. I mean, certainly there was an aspect of how Derek and I put it together, but nevertheless, there's a heart and soul of it that somehow happened.
Yeah, Derek, what's your secret? I never will ask a magician or whatever you want to define yourself as, what are the tricks of the trade? Because that's not a fair question. But what are the tricks of this trade? I just have to know how you approach it.
I mean, I think Frank and I both have we very much value authenticity and honesty and the integrity of the work. So, what people are seeing now is an artifice in the sense that is a crafted story and a work of a work, and but it's through that artifice that we're able to get to a greater truth, and that is what Frank and I were both after. And I think we got lucky that we aligned that way and we're able to work together and understand each other's language, which took time to learn, and that we're surrounded by amazing collaborators that also had the same goals and vision and patience and trust that we shared. And so it was kind of all of those things together that allowed for it to happen. I don't think there was it just we wanted to make something pure and something that broke people and broke the mold in a certain way, and we just stayed on the tracks until we did it.
Have you seen the film? I know this. I talked to you once before, both of you. You were planning to take it to the South by Film Festival to debut it last March, and that didn't happen because the festival didn't happen. Have you been able to see it in a theatrical setting with any kind of audience the way you were able to do it, with the live stage show? You still haven't, huh?
That's what we long for.
Yeah, gosh, that's sort of sad. But you
We
made
did
this.
we did it at a drive-in, like a pop-up drive-in. So we heard people honking afterwards. That's the closest we got.
Yeah, I'm just curious to see what your reaction would be, versus the live theater thing, watching how your film affects people, because I can pretty much guess how it would. Derek, just you personally watching the film, did you see something in it you never saw before, that you've done 560 times or however many times you did this show?
I mean, there was plenty when we were initially watching the footage that was surprising to me, or mostly just how quiet people were and how long they watched me do nothing. That was for me. I was in moments on stage living life, so didn't seem that strange. But watching some of the footage back, not necessarily what's in the movie, but the raw footage of just camera holding on whatever it was holding on, there was so much silence in that theater and you could hear a pin drop, and it was really remarkable to see that as an outsider, to watching an audience go through that, and to see that was pretty remarkable.
But the reason it worked is I asked something very difficult of Derek, and he delivered. He went the distance. Is that the story that semi kind of rambling story that if you call it a story, that Derek is telling, is not the real story that's going on. The real story that's going on is internal to Derek. So when he's silent, we sense he's struggling with something. We sense that he's just not waiting, but there's an activity inside him. And that's what makes us want to just lean forward, because we know something's going on inside this guy. And because Derek was so valiant and being so honest every night, that's why it happened.
It's interesting. What I loved about it too, the section with the cards, where the whole audience is part of it, and the way you filmed that, or the way you allowed it to be shown on screen, however it was put together, is very moving, and that really seems something for these times. This country is so divided. You see it every day. It's just so horrible, and it doesn't look like anything can bring them together. Yet here you did this every night. And you've done it with this film. You show a common humanity, which I think is what comes out of this more than anything, this film.
Yeah, that's really nice of you to say, and we hope that that's true, at least on some level. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of what the show is all about, is just about breaking through what we see to whatever's beyond that, which is the truth, and that's true for people, and that whatever's presented in front of us isn't necessarily the truth. It's just what we see, and it's looking past that to what really is what matters. And so yeah, I think that is kind of a core not idea, but it's what we're all kind of being forced to grapple with right now as a society, is this idea of otherness, and you versus me, and red versus blue, and labels that we give each other and things like that. These are all things that are very personal, and not just to me but to everyone, so that it's personal but also collective. And I think there's a lot there for people to think about, and thankfully a lot of it resonated with others.
Yeah, it definitely does. Did you, when you had the notion that you were going to do this as a film and feature, and you got to get the money for that and everything, did you have pitch sessions where you go in, okay, this is Frank Oz's and my next movie, and what I'm wondering, was it an easy sell?
No. At all. In fact, it was actually a big learning experience, because you'd think with like a show that was very successful in terms of commercially, in a world where that doesn't usually happen, and with Frank, and just it seemed like there's a lot that, and also the content seemed just where we're at, and just very relevant, in part of the zeitgeist. It's like, this is part of the conversation, and this work should exist, and we really should film it. It seemed obvious to me, at least, and that once we were to the point where it's like, yeah, let's do this, I was certain that someone would also see that. And it turns out, no, it's very difficult to get someone else to see that, but thankfully someone did, which was Stephen Colbert. And he tried to help like shepherd it to places that would buy it, maybe, and help us produce it. And he was surprised to find that wasn't happening either. So he just did it himself. And he and his wife Evelyn decided to be the executive producers, and along with Tom Warner and Daryl Roth. I mean, these are people who just believed that this mattered and it was worth putting into the world, and so they backed it themselves, which we're very grateful for.
That's pretty amazing. And did Colbert just get involved because he was an audience member one night? Is that how it happened, or what was it?
Basically, yeah. I mean, he had seen the show, and it resonated with him deeply. And when he heard that we were trying to turn it into a movie, he volunteered to help however he could. And when that didn't work, he decided to just do it himself, which is really putting his money where his mouth is.
And now it's got a big platform on Hulu, Disney and everybody behind that service here. And so how did that deal come about to get it there?
I mean, same thing. It's just trying to find people who saw it for what it is. I mean, we had a few people approach us and interested in having it, but Hulu really seemed like the place that understood that it was something that shouldn't get lost in the shuffle of all the content that's out there today. And really felt like they wanted to give it some, some prominence, and they've been very, very kind to do that for us.
Yeah, and must say, and Derek will agree, when you deliver something that's so unknown and like this, which is, I think, is what people really want, but if it's so unknown, it's difficult for the buyer to slot it into their marketing situation. And they're very generous in listening to both Derek and myself explain where it came from in our hearts and minds. And I think that was a key reason also why we were happy with Hulu, right, Derek?
Yeah, the messaging is really important in terms of how this thing is framed, and we just didn't want it to become, it's easy to mess up how you talk about this show in terms of flattening it to being like, oh, it's an off-Broadway magic show directed by a puppeteer. I mean, it's not really, doesn't really do it, it's not quite what it is. So yeah, we just having partners that still want us involved even when we shouldn't be is really nice for us.
Yeah, well, it's not a documentary. It's not a narrative film. It's its own thing. It's an experience.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's really the reason why it's called In and of Itself, because there is no label for it.
yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, how did that title come up? Did you just like think of it that way, or?
I think it was Derek and Craig, Derek and Glenn, right?
Well, it was kind of fortuitous. Yeah, I've been thinking about titles for a long time because we didn't have one for the longest time. It was just Untitled, and I knew I needed something, and I thought maybe Untitled is the right approach. But In and of Itself came into my head. It's just like it's intrinsically of its own value. It is not defined by otherness. It's this thing by. So I googled the phrase to see what else came up, and the definition came up and stuff like that. And I was sitting in my studio looking at it, and Glenn, who's a producer on the show and the film, came into the studio and sat down and asked me what I was working on. I said, I'm trying to figure out a title for this thing. And he said, well, the show in and of itself is and I said, wait, what did you just say? Said, well, the show in and of itself is just a da 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 da. Now he was just using it in a colloquial sense, like he was just saying it. But I turned the computer around, and on the Google was In and of Itself, and it just felt like a moment I couldn't ignore.
No, like so many. I mean, that's perfect. That's a perfect way to come up with a title for a show like this that has so many truths in it. Are you done with this show now that it's on film? You're not going to go back to do this live, because I would imagine that the kind of audience it's now receiving would have a lot more people interested in seeing it live as well.
Yeah, no, it's done. It was enough. I did it many, many times, and I don't know that the film is truer to the work than the live show was in many ways, because it's, for me it was one show, it was one performance that lasted. That's why the book allows the thing to never end. It keeps going even when, even when I'm not on stage, and so really they're seeing closer to the entirety of the performance than they could if they just saw one part of it on any given night. So I just think that the film is a better representation of what we were trying to do than the live show ever could be.
Yeah. You have a book coming out next month, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, that
A
is
Moral
right.
Man, A Moral Man, A True Story and Other Lies.
That's right.
That's another good title.
Thanks.
And I'll be the shill here. I read it and I think it's terrific.
Ah, okay. What's the premise of the book? Why did you decide to do this? There it is. Okay.
I got a real copy now. Yeah, it's when I 10 years ago, I worked as what's known as a bust out dealer, uh, which is it's a card mechanic or card cheat who's hired by the house to cheat its customers. And what I saw and kind of experienced in that house was revelatory for me in terms of how our realities are shaped and manufactured, and how how we perceive the world and what truth is and what lies are, and where our morality fits in all of that. And so I wrote a book about it, and it felt right for both myself to be rid of this story that I've been carrying around for quite some time, and also just the timing of it, of what we've seen in the last few years, and what, kind of where we are now as a nation of living with multiple truths.
That, boy, again, your timing is amazing for a book with that kind of title and things. And, what's going on right now up to today. I heard Trump talking on TV for the first time, saying he won again. I mean, and these people, are dealing with different lies or different truths, or their own truths, I guess,
Yeah.
are their own lies. It's kind of a fascinating world to write about, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the world, unfortunate world that we're in, where we have to take responsibility for this, the shaping of it and the truths that we put into it.
It seems like it's changed, and it's going to take some interesting things. Frank is giving you a big endorsement on this book.
Absolutely. There's a lot of stuff in there. It's great.
Yeah, as an extension of this. Now, I have, boy, a lot of interest here from the audience, and you got a big crowd here too, I noticed. So I'm going to ask some of these that I'm not going, let's see. Okay, Carl Hansen. I worked on House Sitter as a 14-year-old PA. Hi, Frank. Of course, one of Frank's movies, House Sitter.
Hey!
I also saw In and of Itself live in New York City, and Stephen Colbert and his wife sat right next to my wife.
Oh, wow.
And is that when they got involved? Yeah, you sort of answered that.
Yeah.
It was amazing in person and a beautiful film experience as well. So here's from somebody that's got so many connections to both of you and reacting to the film. But yeah, he was there. Wow, right at the beginning. That's interesting. Okay. Chuck Aiken. Hi, hey Derek. Fantastic film and experience. How long did it take you to develop the concept? And were you always thinking about the film from the beginning? Oh, and I can't wait to see the stories in that book. Thanks again for creating this amazing experience. Well, how long was it percolating in your brain there?
Well, I mean, a lifetime, I guess, but it was a year from like first pen to paper to actually doing it for the first time was a year. But I guess the concepts had been brewing for longer, because I'm finding things in notebooks, and a friend sent me a video clip of me talking. I think things that were clearly put into this work that had affected me much earlier in my life. So a year and a lifetime is basically how long.
Corey Reeder wants to know, how do you top this show? What's next? We know your book's next, but after the book, we don't know. So he feels obligated to see you live after the pandemic. So is there going to be some new kind of live show you're interested down the line?
I mean, Frank and I were talking about it, and I'm any opportunity to play together again is welcome. It's just with this pandemic, it's very hard to get excited about working on a live theater show when it's just getting together is not even possible. I mean, a lot of the work was done with Frank and I just sitting in a room, making jokes and talking and working on things, and it's very difficult to do that in these circumstances. So probably just not this second.
An anonymous attendee here today asks you, do you feel guilty at all for making hundreds of people cry every night?
No, but there were times like the first time I had to call someone a failure in the performance, and the first time I did it, luckily Frank was there. He was there all the time, but he was there that night, and the person stood up and they were a failure, and I had to say it, and it took a while, and I said it, and after the show I told Frank, I was like, that did not feel good. I even questioned whether or not I should actually say it, and Frank said you can't deny them of their truth, which is true. So I haven't felt bad since.
That's important, Frank, to keep the truth there no matter what comes up.
Yeah, I think there's many reasons Derek and I think work really well together, in part because the heart of the show doesn't come from me, it comes from Derek, but I sense the heart of the show from him, and I sense the purity, and I sense what he really wants. And so my job in part was to keeping him honest to what I believe he really wanted.
Yeah, I mean, you can see the emotions and what happens with certain people. I mean, where you're bringing things out that they've kept hidden or kept him back for a long time, and that's a very that's a lot of responsibility, I imagine, too. Yeah.
It is.
Fantastic. This is from. Okay, let me see here.
I see these too. Are you looking at these Q&A?
Yeah, I'm looking. Yeah, they're right here. Oh, here we go. Since the show is now done, and there probably aren't that many of us watching now, and we'll all promise to keep your confidence, how'd you do the personalized letter part? Of course, you must get that all the time.
Yeah, I get obviously asked about how things work often, and I don't talk about it, but not for the reason that I think people think. It's not to you know, our friend Michael Weber, who worked with us on the show, he said that the magician's job is not to keep secrets from people, but keep secrets for people. And so that's part of it, is keeping secrets for people. But more importantly, it's just not a dialogue that I'm interested in participating in, because it changes what the work is about. For me, the work is not about how things were achieved or not. It's the meaning value of the work that is what matters to me. And so it's just by participating in that dialogue of talking about how things may or may not be done, etc. It's having the wrong conversation from my point of view as an artist trying to make work. I would rather discuss the things that are of value, and do everything I can to keep that conversation on track, because it's a very difficult conversation to have when you're in my position. If I were a contemporary artist, or worked in a field where the meaning value is what the primary focus of what the work is usually about, I wouldn't feel the need to try to stick to that conversation, because people would they would understand what I'm trying to do or what I'm trying to say. That doesn't exist yet, and it may not, as far as I know. But I'm just going to always do everything I can to keep the conversation in the lane that I feel it should be, and that's on what the work is really about.
All right, this one from Jake Lieberman. Frank, which of your voice characters is your favorite to do, and why is it Yoda?
I don't think this is about that.
I know, but Jake wants to know.
Well, I think probably Daffy Duck.
All right. Let's see. How did the inclusion of multiple participants on the book and letter sections change the experience?
Change the experience of the film. Read that again.
It's just, that's all it says. How did the inclusion of multiple participants on the book and letter sections change the experience? Maybe.
Oh, they mean in the film. Yeah. I kind of answered this earlier when I said it gives you a broader sense of what the actual show was, which was many shows, and it also gave a more diverse, idea of what, not everyone's reaction was different, and also it tells a more honest story, in the sense that if you were there on one night and you saw one person with a book and one person receive a letter, because again, the nature of being known as a magician, it's very easy and common for people to assume that those people were either, stooges or actors playing a part, that the person who took the book home didn't really take it home, that the assignment was, this was just theatrical in some way. So that's what a lot of people thought every single night that they saw it. They weren't sure, is that really the person from yesterday? Is that person with the letter work for him? With the film, that it's the truth. That, they're definitely real people who took this book and took it back, and these are really people who got letters from loved ones and things like that. So I just think it adds to the clarity of what the performance is.
Marla wants to know, I saw the show at the Geffen twice, but the film still felt very fresh. Did you make any changes to it for New York show or the film performances? So from the LA version to New York to the movie. Frank, were there any changes?
I'm sorry, go ahead, Derek.
Yeah.
Remember the mirror, Frank? We had a big mirror.
There was a different ending that was actually not used in New York. But I think the main addition is that that inner story, that inner struggle that you sense on stage through Derek, that was not in Los Angeles, and that took a while, and that took a lot of courage from Derek. Because I asked him to do something that was very difficult for an actor. I asked him not to say anything. You know, most actors think about their lines. Don't say anything until you can't not say something. And that's why the pauses are there. And that is the most valuable time, which is that nonverbal communication. You can see him struggling there.
It's interesting. All right, this is interesting, actually. This is from Gary Meyer. Hi, Gary Meyer. The film really works and answers questions for those of us who saw it live in New York about the difference from night to night. In New York, I was in the front row, but my wife was in the last row. Our reactions were very different. She had trouble totally getting involved back there. The film turned her around. How did you decide what would work live from different parts of the theater?
Yeah, that's partially Frank's fault. I mean, it's my fault, obviously. But I would ask Frank, like, should I speak up? I don't know if the people in back can hear me. He's like, ah, forget him. Just make him lean in.
Exactly.
And so that
it wasn't because it wasn't a performance.
Yeah,
it was him on stage working something out in his life, and his job was not to perform for people. His job was to do his life, and people would be listening in.
and Frank was in the back row, so he was actually behind the back row. So he was very aware of what my performance was like from the back of the room. And the truth is, in the back of the room, or even halfway up, 4 rows back, there's so many nuances that you can't tell how honest it actually is and how truthful the show actually is, because I just look like a guy on stage monologuing from the back of the room. But in the film, as Frank always points out, the close-up really is what changes everything, because you can't help but know what is true and what is not on look on my face, or what I'm saying, or what an audience member is saying, or look on their face. There's so many more truths captured in the film than you could actually recognize in the live experience. And especially, I understand Gary's point completely, and I understand why his wife would have been turned off by the show live, and it resonated with her on film, is because this is why I say the work is truer on film than it was live, for this exact same reason. Like, I totally understand why someone who saw it live is like, I don't get it. It's because, like, yeah, if depending on the night, depending on how far back you were, if you just thought you were seeing a theater show and didn't know for a fact that you were seeing truth on a stage, I could see someone dismissing it as just like a blase, theater experience. But if you went in with the proper mindset, or trusted what you were seeing was actually true despite the context, it's a totally different experience.
Yeah, there were always people who wanted to know how tricks were done, and they saw it at a very superficial level. But there are not many of those. But what the biggest advantage, I mean, the film is a huge advantage because of close-up and because we can see the faces. That's the number one reason. But also, as we mentioned, I was talking off camera with you, Pete, that the value of being in the theater is feeling everybody's hearts beating at the same time. That's what we don't have in movies. That's the trouble in these sessions.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know, exactly. How do you think the idea of identity has changed during the pandemic? That's sort of interesting, since identity is such a big part of this.
Wow. I mean, I know for myself, I can only speak for myself in terms of I've become more aware of my own identity in terms of solitude, and what that means, like, just to be with myself, and not rely on others in a way that I may have relied on them before. And so it's a very introspective time, which is good in a sense. And so I don't know, it's just turned the arrow of attention on myself in a way that it hadn't and probably couldn't have were it not for the pandemic.
Oh, interesting. Nick wants to know, I imagine it was to some degree numbing to embody the emotional difficulties of your youth night after night. How did you stay emotionally engaged or fresh after the first 300 shows?
That's a good question. I was fortunate enough to be saying my own words. I understand and maybe it wouldn't matter. But because I said my own words and I got to speak things that I had written and thought were important, I never got tired of saying it. It was always about finding, you know, finding the legibility and the clarity for others in those words, and how can we express these ideas and get them to hear them, even though it's the same words. How do you get them to hear them in a new way each night? And for me, it was a constant exploration of depth and how deep one can go with the same words and stories. And I had never drilled that far down before until this, and the show gave me the opportunity to see how far I could go with it, and with Frank's encouragement, and he saw the depth long before I did, so it was just a matter of if I was willing to go there or not.
And that was the key thing for me. Would he go the distance? Because many people don't. And he then ended up being very courageous and going the distance many times, which really means having your heart open and allowing yourself to be vulnerable and still going forward.
That's interesting. This is from another Nick, spelled differently.
Yeah. Let me just, and Frank, this is great, by the way. Having people ask real questions in real time. We've never done this.
No, it's
Oh, see, I know that. Well, that goes back to my question of if you'd ever seen this with in a theater with an audience.
It's as close as we've gotten. So it's
yeah. And you have a lot of people asking questions, more than I've ever seen since I've been doing this. But that's why I'm trying to get through as many as I can. But are there any plans to make the big sailor's logbook from the show available to read?
Not right now, but we're not opposed to it.
Okay, that's cool. How do you develop the illusions? Do you perform magic in other circumstances? Any folks like Penn and Teller that you admire?
I just have a background in it. It's one of those things I understand well, and have a few smart people that I trust to bounce ideas off of. But it was all done in-house, and nothing saw the light of day until we did it for the first time on opening night.
Interesting. Did you workshop it and make any changes by the time you launched it? You sort of alluded to that, Frank, that you opened it without being quite ready, and so you were.
Well, we opened it in Geffen about being ready. I do believe we were much more ready in New York, I think, Derek, in my opinion. Right?
Yeah, closer. Not all the way there, but we were closer.
Yeah, of course not opening night, but certainly was more. Geez, I forgot the question, Pete, you were asking.
Did you workshop it?
Oh,
and make any changes?
We actually, people are annoyed at me because what happens in a off-Broadway and a Broadway show is you set it up, you get all the cues set, the lighting and sound, and it's locked. It doesn't change. And of course, I would be changing it with Derek constantly. And Derek was very, very receptive to it. He and I both want to do the same thing, which is just keep making it better.
2 weeks before closing night, after 700 some performances, 2 weeks before closing night, Frank had notes. 2 weeks before closing night. It was great. It was what it should be, because it's live. It's live theater. Like, change it. If you see something that you think could open something up in a way that hadn't before, change it. Neither of us understand this whole thing of once the show's locked, it's locked. That is not the way things should be made, especially not in live theater, when you have the opportunity to have it stay alive. Otherwise, that's when you get that thing of it becomes stale and the people start just phoning their lines in and things like that. You just have to keep it alive. So yeah, mix it up.
Gary says, Frank's been making his own kind of magic for so many years. Thanks for that. Did you know each other before?
Segue.
They want to know if he wants to know if you knew each other before the show or what brought you together.
Yeah, we have a mutual friend, Andy Nyman, And when Derek was doing a show with somebody else, temporarily with somebody else, Andy said, "You've got to go see this guy." And I went down with my wife and saw the show, and I was more impressed by what I was really impressed and memorable to me was not the show, but was Derek's non-performative style. I mean, he didn't perform. We had to come to him. He wasn't going to sweat and perform, and that's rare. And so afterwards, I met him and we shook hands, and Vanessa, his wife, and my wife, Victoria, we would meet each other for years, and eventually that's how the friendship grew there.
Oh, it's interesting. This is an interesting question for Derek. Do the skills you've acquired get in the way of or enhance your personal relationships? Yeah.
That's an
Go for it.
interesting question. Both, I imagine both. I mean, yeah, like anything, both. They, I'm not sure what skills they're referring to, but yeah, obviously there's a lot of isolation involved with developing skills like this, and you tend to be on the more protective side when it comes to information. That can be both helpful and harmful depending on the relationship.
Wow. Everyone has a story to tell with no limitations on time or money. What's a story that each of you tell? If you had all the time and all the money to do it, is there a story?
That's too frightening for me. I don't think it's healthy to have all the time and all the money.
Yeah.
I think we work best when we have restrictions and tighten the hatches, so we have to work through our expression in a way that isn't about money or time. It's about being creative.
Yeah, and I feel, I mean, I told the story I wanted to tell within and of itself. I don't have there's not a single thing that I feel like I regret or feel like we should, wish we'd done that differently. It's all what we wanted to do. But there were restrictions with that. I mean, we didn't have all the time in the world, certainly didn't have all the money in the world, but those limitations are part of the work.
Can you speak a bit about your working relationship with the editor in shaping the film? Who was the editor?
Michael Fleming, Michael R. Fleming, ended up editing the whole thing, and he's a remarkable guy, really, really, a really talented editor. But we kind of took a risk on him. He was recommended through a friend, and he didn't have a lot of. He works on really big movies, but he's
as an assistant editor.
As an assistant editor, so he's part of a larger machine, and he's never really been given his proper shot. And so we saw in him what he's capable of, and his sensibility. And Frank was the one I deferred to. I have no experience working with editors. I do now, but Frank was the one who's worked with tons of editors. So it was really Frank who saw that he was the guy for us.
Oh, interesting. Wonderful film. I couldn't stop telling people about it. That's what you're going to get a lot with this movie, people talking about it. Did the IMs all come from the board that people picked and that Derek called, or were they off the cuff and intuitively declared? Was there anyone who didn't sit down after you called them who they were? The last one, Storyteller, was not shown on camera, but Derek asked her to sit down. Can you follow all that?
Right. There's a lot of questions there.
I know.
The answer is, for the most part, they were all the IMs that were chosen off the board. But from time to time, I would notice something or feel something and change it, call an audible in the moment and say something that was not represented on the board, and that would be right for that moment. The last person to sit down, I always ask for the last person to sit down every night, every show.
That was an editorial choice. We didn't feel we had to, sorry, Derek, I didn't mean to jump in, but we didn't, I remember very well the decision. We didn't feel we had to have a name, sit down, have a name and sit down. We've established that, and we were at a point where that would have hurt the rhythms of Derek, I felt. And Derek too.
Yeah.
Interesting. Someone says, I may have missed Bill H. I may have missed this in the discussion earlier, but are parts of the film, e.g. home movies and all the animation, not in the show? Or are they done differently in the show?
There's no animation, no home movies. None of that is represented live on stage. And so all of those moments where people were just listening to a person talking on stage. There wasn't anything to look at. Nothing was happening. There was just stillness and language. That was it.
Pierce wants to know, how's your mom doing and your relationship with her after the movie?
She disowned me, so I just have to live with that now. It's a new life I'm living now. No, it's great. She's great, and she's very proud, and you know, she's happy with how it turned out.
In all the shows you've done, is there one particular night that stands out in your memory? One show that just moved you in a way you never expected? Is there one you remember more than any other?
Yes, but not because it was good. There was an infamous show, infamous for all of us, that where literally
The second show.
the second show where literally everything that could go wrong went wrong, and
Oh,
it was so much so that Frank presented me with a plaque with a printed sheet of the every night the stage manager writes up everything that happens after shows, and most of the time it's just, you know, great show tonight, this happened, so and so was in the audience, and just kind of a nice little summary of the evening. And this one was like a legal document full of just one thing after another, and just this disaster of a show. And Frank framed that and gave it to me with the words "never forget" at the top, and so that hangs on my wall to this day, and I don't forget it.
oh, that's funny. Someone's asking, has anyone reached out to you and said that your show has made them more open to the idea of there being an afterlife?
No, no.
Nope, no, that's new. That'd be
Okay.
new. Yeah, no.
I'm not sure if this person's doing that. That was just the question. I saw the show at the Geffen and I L.O.V.E.loved in capital letters it. I didn't think it was going to work so well as a movie. You guys really worked some magic there. I was one of the Tomorrow participants, and I remember staying up all night reading the book. It was fascinating. It was so fascinating. Congratulations and best of luck with the movie and your future project. So, oh, you have one of the Tomorrow
Oh, that's great.
guys here. What of the best moments from the live show that you couldn't fit it, into the cut of the movie that have stayed with you, that you had to take out? Or are there anything that, you know, filmmakers always seem to have things they don't want to let go of? Was there anything like that?
No,
I don't think so.
everything. There's only one thing. It's still in the film. It's just moved. There was a monologue or a short thing I said at the beginning of the show that's not in the movie, which is talking about the kind of the context of seeing a man on a stage talking in front of strangers and standing in a pool of light and blah blah blah. And it was the moment where I said, "Knowing you won't believe me is the only reason I'm going to tell you the truth." That we just moved, but other than that, everything is in there.
All right, and I got to end it with this question from Kim Adelman. Have the gold bricks showing up on eBay?
Not yet, but it'd be hard to verify them, so I'm not sure if that works.
Oh, that's great. You guys are great. I want to thank Film Independent for making this all possible today. And I want to remind everybody, because clearly you're going to be telling your friends about this, that it is available now on Hulu for everyone to see. Thank you, Frank Oz. Thank you, Derek DelGaudio. And thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Pete.
Thank you, Pete.